Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Fighting Irish, Part 2. I arrived in Clones mid-January 1987. I made the trip with a business proposal that would resolve the pending lawsuit between Barry and Barney. As a boxing lawyer, I was uniquely situated to settle this matter. I was a friend of both Patty McGuigan's and Mickey Duff's, co-promoter with Barney for all Barry's big fights. I had the trust and confidence of someone on both sides of the problem. I saw a rare opportunity to do some good, and by the way, make a lot of money at the same time. I arrived in Clones during the worst snowstorm since World War II. Clones was the coldest town in Ireland that day. Lucky me. I was staying at the hotel owned by Barry's in-laws across the street from the McGuigan family market. The heat came up from the solitary tiny radiator in puffs. Barry was initially unwilling to talk to me about Barney, but Patty insisted on his giving me the courtesy of listening since I'd come all the way from New York at my own expense and on my own initiative. After dinner with the family, Patty and I and Barry got down to business. Barry's first words were colder and more bitter than the weather outside. He told me, "Rudy, before you say anything, I want you to know I'll never fight for that son of a bitch again. I just want you to know that from the start. I'm an open person, and I believe in directly telling you how I feel." Well, of course, I acknowledged his feelings and his right to hold them. I asked him to hear me out and to reserve his judgment until after I spoke. He graciously agreed. Barry and Patty listened to me attentively for the next 2 hours. I began by declaring my purpose. I told him that I thought I was especially well situated to resolve the dispute to the benefit of all concerned, including myself. We reviewed Barry's career with Barney at the helm. I asked questions and elicited needed details. My questions also served to allow Barry and Patty to voice their many grievances, big and small, which is important. Both were resentful of Barney's hypocrisy and undisclosed promotional interest. They felt that they'd been taken financially and personally. I asked them, how much you think Barney owes you? And they went through a bunch of calculations in some detail and came up with the sum was roughly equivalent to $1,100,000 American. Well, I explained to them the cold hard facts of the big-time boxing business, where around the world it's run by a handful of promoters like Arum, King, and Duff. I revealed that these promoters use rating organizations as their accomplices. Arum preferred the World Boxing Association, or WBA, also known as the WB Arum. King used the World Boxing Congress, WBC, also known as the WB King. Mickey Duff himself loved the British Boxing Board of Control, which in reality was a private concern, not a government agency, as a lot of people thought. I did this to show that at their level, only a handful of people could pull off big, expensive boxing promotions. All these people were competitors, but all were forced to deal with each other from time to time. To a man, the attitude of boxing's movers and shakers was identical. Boxers may come and go, but we're here to stay. That summed it up. Duff put it to me in a more humorous framework when he said in his deep Cockney accent, "Rudy, never fall in love with those fighters. They'll schmooze you, use you, abuse you, and lose you, and don't you forget it." Well, so much for that. I wanted to make my point to Patty and Barry. There were only a few promoters on the global scale, and since they all worked together, you had few real options. You had to choose one or another. Since Barney had done a capable job, and since they all profited at a boxer's expense, then it was a case of better the devil you know. I then talked about Barry's real value as a box office attraction that could fill stadiums with the right opponent. I showed Barry how he could earn many millions in just 3 carefully selected matches over the next 2 years. He could have one comeback fight to shake off the rust, one title match to win a belt, and a title unification bout with Azuma Nelson of Ghana, the other big-name champ in his weight class. The first 2 opponents would be selectively safe. Nelson himself was formidable, but not unbeatable. But that was no problem because the payday would be so large that Barry could retire comfortably if he wished. If he lost in a close, exciting match, there would be another giant payday for a rematch. If he won the rematch, a rubber match would ensue with Nelson or somebody else for a big payday with an easier opponent. If the purse is big enough, nobody loses. You and your opponent are partners in a very lucrative enterprise, I told Barry. Barry was now among the 1% of boxers who make 99% of the money. At the end of my 2 hours, Barry and Patty were all bright eyes and bushy tails as I wrote out a 14-point plan a la Woodrow Wilson as we spoke. Essentially, the proposal called for restitution of the $1,100,000 Barry felt Barney owed him. I termed this as $250,000 on the unpaid Las Vegas IOU and $850,000 as a quote-unquote signing bonus to extend Barry's present contract with Barney, which is about to expire. Signing bonus was really a euphemism for restitution, and it allowed Barney to save face, which would make it appealing. Barry would exercise complete control over all boxing decisions, including selection of opponents, trainer, corner team, location of fight, size of ring, etc. Barry and Barney would split 50-50 the gross earnings of the bout. Patty would be president of a promotional corporation, which, along with a similar entity headed by Barney, would co-promote Barry's 3 fights on an equal basis. Barry would have sole and exclusive rights to all his earnings outside the ring. Both sides would make a joint public statement of resolution to the conflict in a positive, praiseworthy type of language designed for all to look good. I would represent Barry in this deal for 5% of his gross earnings. After presenting my plan, I looked at Barry for his reaction. Direct as usual, he said, "Let's call my solicitor right now if you don't mind." He had a broad smile on his face and his eyes lit up. I declined because it was well after midnight. I didn't want to wake a lawyer whom I'd never met with a proposal which he'd never heard. I subdued Barry's enthusiasm long enough to make plans to sit with him and his lawyer the day after next when Barry was due in London for a public appearance. Things were looking good. On the appointed day, Paddy drove me and his oldest son Dermot to Lurgan in Northern Ireland to meet Eamon McAvoy, the solicitor for Barry. Barry would meet us there, having flown back to Belfast from London. We drove past the infamous Long Kesh prison, just a short distance from the solicitor's office. Mr. McAvoy was duly skeptical of me, my motives, and my plan, which I laid out for him. I established my credentials to his satisfaction. Mention of my proposed 5% fee cleared up my motive. A good Irish country lawyer, McAvoy had to be shown now why I thought the plan would succeed. I went into Barney's psychological makeup and social status. I predicted that at first, Barney would balk, and then, before the approaching trial, he would settle because he, far less than Barry, could afford the truth coming out. He had more to lose and wouldn't allow that to happen. We couldn't miss because Barney might be exposed as an unethical, hypocritical welcher. By the way, I asked, when did Barney Eastwood ever pass up a chance to make millions? Everyone agreed, and I got the go-ahead. I proposed raising the settlement figure to allow some leeway in the inevitable bargaining process. Always a good idea when facing the likes of Mr. Eastwood across the table. The ride back to Clones was unforgettable. Barry drove his big white Mercedes sedan, and we were all in high spirits, stemming from our agreement on a battle plan and the high probability of succeeding. I was particularly happy for Barry, who could be avoiding a possible bad outcome after the trial. And don't forget my 5%. Days before, back at the hotel, when we first talked, I urged Barry not to sue. I told him that Barney was a big fish in a little Northern Irish pond. He was more than likely playing golf or rubbed elbows socially with the high court judges and their friends. Human nature is the same everywhere. If there was any doubt on any issue, Barney would probably get the benefit of the doubt, which could be determinative. Barry had as much chance of beating Barney in high court as Barney had of beating Barry in the ring. Barry, for the first time since he lost his crown, was laughing and lighthearted. His future was opening up in his mind, and it was looking good. Everything made sense. We stopped at a roadside restaurant for beers, burgers, and fries, or chips as they say in Ireland. The diners were gawking at Barry while trying to appear nonchalant. Those bold enough to approach our table were warmly received. The 4 of us started telling jokes, and the laughs kept coming faster and louder. One joke led to another, and we were all decent raconteurs or comics. Soon we were roaring and literally laughing ourselves out of our seats. Barry related a short anecdote about his father and he, after Barry received the British Boxing Award as Boxer of the Year from the BBBC at the Claridge Hotel in London. They were outside afterwards in their tuxedos waiting for a limousine ride, and Paddy, who was in his cups, was pretty exuberant and spontaneously yelled out, I can kick the shit out of anybody here. And he waved his arms wildly to his side, and one arm struck the knee of a very tall guy in a tuxedo who was standing right next to him. That guy looked down at Patty and said, "Excuse me, mate, do you know who I am?" And Patty, without looking, said, "I don't know, and I don't give a shit." And the guy then proceeded to say, "Well, I'm Henry Cooper, heavyweight champ of the British Empire." Patty now looked up and spontaneously recognizing Henry Cooper said, for all to hear, "Like I said, me and Henry here could kick the shit out of anybody." And everybody got a big laugh at that. Well, that night was a magical night on the way home back to Clonis, and it was made all the more precious by Patty's passing away before the year was out. At the usually tense border crossing back to Clonis, Barry was warmly greeted by the British troops who laid down their automatic weapons to shake his hand and get his autograph. I returned to New York with the first phase of my mission complete. As soon as I arrived, I had to rush my younger brother to the hospital in a near coma. Sadly, he never left that place alive, but that's the subject of another episode. Life is a roller coaster. I contacted Mickey Duff, and I gave him the news in detail. He wrote down the 14 points with comments for each one. Predictably, he was not wild about Barry's desire to control his own career or the large sum, quote-unquote, signing bonus. He said Barney had sworn off Barry, and Barney never changed his mind, but he would pass on my proposal and get Barney's reaction nevertheless. I thought nevertheless was the key word here. They didn't waste time. 2 days later came the reply. Mickey said, Barney says he'll not pay Barry any money beyond the IOU sum of $250,000, which is no problem. Everything else could be worked out. Mickey offered me a reward if I brought the McGuigans to the table. No, thanks. I declined, explaining that I would represent the McGuigans only and be paid by them only. Mickey accepted that. I reported back to the McGuigans and advised them to wait. I'd predicted a certain amount of bluster and resistance initially. Barney's first reaction was just like Barry's first instinctive resistance to my ideas. In fact, I was heartened by the knowledge that the only real objection was to the money. I had expected wholesale rejection. I figured we were doing better than I'd hoped for this early in the game. I went on to advise Barry to be patient, keep in shape, and stay away from public statements while we let the pressure of the upcoming trial build. He agreed, and he followed my advice. I called Duff and asked him to call me if Barney ever had a change of heart. Mickey told me that Barney was a man of his word and never one to change his mind. Well, I thought to myself, a lot of people say that. 2 months later, just 2 weeks before the trial, Mickey Duff called me from Monaco where he was training Buster Drayton. This is it, I thought. Mickey Duff never in his life made a casual phone call. I wasn't surprised. Diplomatically, I concealed my self-satisfaction. I let Mickey run with the ball. He asked if we could sit down. I told him there was no problem. He laid out some preconditions. We should meet at a convenient private place without publicity. I should come with Barry and Patty, and he'd bring Barney, who was now willing to work out the money demands. Of course, this would be a closed-door negotiation and strictly bona fide. All parties should be ready to resolve, once and for all, their differences. Mickey suggested his London flat as the best locale. I agreed and called Patty. Well, Patty was as delighted as I was. He always believed in my plan, and now his faith was justified. Barry was temporarily unavailable because Sandy had been hospitalized with pregnancy problems. Barry was at her bedside all the night before, and the crisis passed, thankfully. I told Patty to take his time and to wait for an appropriate moment to talk to Barry. He said Barry would be anxious to know the good news. By the next day, Barry was on board. I called Mickey, who asked for a short time to set things up. I agreed. Just days later, Patty called me. His voice was grim while asking, "Have you heard the news?" I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought it might have been about Sandy's health. Patty said he called Barry earlier and Barry was fighting mad. Barry's London barrister had called Barry to tell him about an article in the London Daily Express tabloid. The author, Kevin Mosley, had interviewed Mickey Duff, and the story appeared under a large bold-faced headline, one word, McGreedy. I went to Times Square, and there was a big newsstand there that sold the foreign newspapers. I managed to get a copy of that day's Daily Express. In the article, Duff was quoted as follows. The problem was that McGuigan became influenced by his greed. He made money on a short-term basis, the overwhelming factor, and he paid a terrible price. The piece went on to say, Duff believes that McGuigan's insistence on higher purse persuaded Eastwood to accept the Las Vegas fight with Stevie Cruz in unfavorable conditions. That decision cost Barry his crown. Duff told me that he accepted £20,000 for a series of interviews on 3 famous fighters that he had handled, Frank Bruno, Lloyd Hunnigan, and Barry McGuigan. He said he accepted months before, securing the knowledge that his ties to McGuigan were severed for good. He also said it was no big deal because despite the lead caption, McGreedy, the article was 90% praiseworthy of Barry. The story was a monkey wrench of monumental proportions. Barry was livid with Duff for twisting the truth to help Eastwood in the court of public opinion and perhaps in the high court itself, where he might turn up as a witness. All bets are off, Patty informed me. Barry wants no part of Duff or Eastwood. Duff's disclaimer is unacceptable. Mickey couldn't understand Barry's anger. Business was business. Name-calling was a regular byproduct of the boxing business. No reason to get excited. Barry didn't feel that way, and I couldn't change his mind. On the morning of the first trial date, at the courthouse steps, Barry and Barney reached a settlement, supposedly in the area of $600,000. My plan would have earned Barry between $5 and $10 million. Barry took the short view at his long-term expense. Maybe Mickey Duff was right after all. Or maybe Barry's outlook was formed in the Hardscrabble family grocery store. In Barry's autobiography, which came out years later, I got a passing mention as a New York boxing lawyer who took Patty to see the 16-year-old Mike Tyson to train in Catskill, New York. This whole story was never written or mentioned. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.